Welcome to Dead Giveaway, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of playing giving. I'm your host, Matt Treadwell. Join me as I sit down with inspiring professionals who are shaping legacies and making a lasting impact, one gift at a time. Let's dig in. Thank you for joining us at the Dead Giveaway podcast. Before we jump into our first episode, I want to give a little background on how we got here. Back in 2019, Craig Ruck and Barbara Yeager started the process of creating a podcast for the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners. That pod was going to showcase the expertise of the Leadership Institute, CGP members, and conference presenters. The plan was to interview retiring elders, Hall of Fame members, opinion makers, provocative thinkers, and the like. The pod was also going to provide practical tips and examples as tutorials. Well, we all know what happened in 2020, and the podcast got sidelined. Fast forward to early 2024, and the Emerging Professionals Committee was considering big ideas, and the concept of a podcast showcasing people's careers, how they got started, how they grew, and became leaders was suggested. Unbeknownst to the group, at the 2023 conference, I had discussed a similar idea with Lisa Shimola, a past EP committee chair. So when the committee brought it back up, I thought this was the perfect time to see if this was a feasible idea. I had coffee with Jessica Hall, and we outlined the basics of what a CGP-produced pod would look like, the timeline, and how everything would function. I left that meeting and called Carly Yoho, a member of the EP committee, asking if she would be my co-host. While she couldn't make the commitment to co-host, Carly was instrumental in helping set the vision and direction of this pod. The three of us pitched our idea to Michael Kenyon in June, and finalized a plan to move forward. The next step was to honor the history of the pod. Through Barbara, we were able to connect with Craig and ask one of the most difficult questions we could ask. Can we use the name Dead Giveaway? Craig not only said yes, but asked how he could help. And with that, we were off. The only thing left to do was to do what we in gift planning do best: talk to people and let them tell their stories. In this first episode, I sit down with Nicole Engdahl, past chair of National CGP Board. We met just moments after we closed the 2024 conference in Orlando. So if it sounds like we were both losing our voices, well, we probably are. This was one of the first interviews I did for Dead Giveaway and helped to set the groundwork for all the conversations to come. Our conversation hits on the highlights and lowlights of her career, and, of course, we talk about her group of super friends. So, without further ado, I bring to you Dead Giveaway.
My name is Nicole Engdahl. I am the Vice President of Individual Giving for the African Wildlife Foundation in Washington, D.C. We're actually headquartered in Nairobi, but I'm at the North American headquarters.
What were you doing before you got into philanthropy?
Before I got into philanthropy, I was in grad school. I've actually been in philanthropy my entire adult career, and I went straight through from undergrad to graduate school because I wanted to be a communications professor. So I thought that was a great track for me. And I got a full ride scholarship to graduate school to be a graduate assistant, which I went to Northern Illinois University. And at that school, because it's so huge, they require public speaking classes for all of their undergrads. So they had graduate assistants who would actually be teaching the classes. So you got to practice teaching as well as take your grad school classes at the same time. And it was wonderful. I really loved it. I had a health scare halfway through my first year. And so the summer in between my 2 years of graduate school, I really thought some things through. And I thought, keep going on seemed like a lot at that point. And so I changed my major. I laugh about this all the time, from rhetorical criticism, which is like such an academic major, to organizational communication. And I finished my master's in organizational communication. And so I started to look for jobs, and I was looking for jobs in marketing or in philanthropy. And my father was a fundraiser, and so I was already familiar with it. And even when that second year of graduate school, I was writing papers on nonprofits. So when we talk about organizational communication, for example, you take an apologia class, the study of apology. And this will date me. It tells you when I was in school. People were talking about like the Chrysler scandal or the Tylenol scandal. And I talked about the United Way scandal. So how Air Money was charged with all of those counts of fraud and how that really disrupted the nonprofit sector. even in graduate school, I was starting to focus a little bit more on nonprofits. And then my first job out of grad school was with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation of Wisconsin. And I started right off the get-go doing special event fundraising. I've been in fundraising ever since. I've done special event fundraising. I did annual fund at a university. Then I went to work for a different disease organization called the Tuberous Sclerosis Alliance, and I did a little bit of everything there. I did major gifts. I did corporate events, foundations, like a little bit of everything, but major gifts was really my specialty. And then I got into plan giving, and that was with the National Geographic Society.
Can you talk a little bit about
Yeah.
how you got into plan giving, that transition and lessons that you learned?
Absolutely. So I'll tell the story really quickly, which was I interviewed for a job at Major Gifts, got to the final, was interviewing this, said, we've hired somebody else because they have more experience. However, we have this other position as a plan giving officer. Would you come back and interview for that? Which was comical to me because I'd never done plan giving before. So I said, I didn't get that job that I'm currently doing because you hired somebody else who has more experience. You want me to do this job that I have no experience in. And she said, you have the relationship skills. We can teach you the rest. And so that was really the beginning of my journey. And a lot of it that will teach you everything else came from my local chapter of CGP and the CGP National Conference, as well as the people that I was working with. And so using gift planning, I did gift planning solely for 2.5 jobs. I'll explain that. So I was a plan giving officer at National Geographic. And then I did plan giving marketing and stewardship for Special Olympics. And then I was recruited to start the formalized plan giving program at the National Park Foundation. And about 1.5 years into it, I had a boss who said to me, we need to reorg this. You could do anything. I'm just curious. What would you do? And I said, I would put membership, annual giving, mid-level giving, and plan giving together under one umbrella. And she was like, I like that idea. Tell me more. And so I just threw some ideas out there. And so within 1.5 years, I was then the vice president of planned and annual giving, which we affectionately refer to as PAG. And so I did that at the national parks for about 8 years. We had an incredible team, a really successful team, actually. So that influences the way I see everything. So I see annual giving and mid-level and plan giving really as being all combined. It was so great to have a team that was automatically thinking about each other, because then it just happened really, I hate to use the word synergistically, but it did. But it really does. If everybody's responsible for everybody else, then it's not competitive. So I'd worked at places where, for example, Special Olympics, the annual fund it's one of the largest membership organizations in the country, or at least it was at that time. And so there was constant fear that what we were doing in plan giving was going to take away from. And we actually did, I think we had to do it 3 times. It might have only been twice, but we had to test it to prove that marketing plan gifts was actually helping the annual fund membership program, not taking away from. And so I had all that experience. So then when I went to the job at the parks, it was like, I already know all these go together. And when I got to the parks, the way it was originally, first year where it was set up, the person who was leading mid-level and the person who was leading membership, they hated each other. They could barely be in the same room together. Some of this is like personalities, and some of it, the way you've been trained, right? Because they really saw it as they were competing over the same people. You put them under one umbrella, then all of a sudden that goes away. Then it's, we have a goal. You have individual goals, but we as a team have a goal. And I'm really ridiculously proud of this. As I said, I was at the National Parks for 8 years, and the team that I oversaw, it was the only team in the entire organization met or exceeded its revenue goals every single year.
Wow.
And that I've never seen that anywhere. Like it's not logical, because what if there's a recession? What if there's this? What if there's that? And we did that through the pandemic. Now I can remember there was 1 year that membership fell shy. And my director of membership was this incredible guy. He was so driven and he was so upset, right? And I said, no, your 2 colleagues surpassed their goals. So we as a team surpassed our goal. So I don't remember what the number is. I'm making up these numbers, but let's say the 3 teams were responsible for raising 30 million in cash. We raised like 32. So it doesn't matter. It does, but it doesn't, right? Because I didn't want my membership guy to be punished for feeding into the other 2 programs. So if membership is feeding into mid-level, or if it's feeding into plan giving, and that's success for everybody around. So you can hear how it's all intertwined. But to me, gift planning, plan giving, legacy giving, whatever you want to talk it, it's integral to everything else that we do. And so about 1.5 years ago, I was recruited to come work at the African Wildlife Foundation and do something similar to what I did at the parks, which is they're in the middle of a campaign. And it was to really help them level up and rebuild the team and really build it so that it's long-term sustainable. That's what we did at the parks. And I was really proud of the fact that's going to outlast me. You know me well enough to know I feel very strongly about you don't do it for you. You do it for the greater good, and you do it for the long term. You want to leave the organizations in better shape than when you join them, and you also want to set them up for tremendous success in the future. To me, plan giving is interwoven into all of those ideas.
Let's go back a little bit. When you first came in the plan giving, was that a leadership role?
No.
Can you talk about how you gained experience in plan giving?
Yeah.
Because you came from major gifts, you didn't have that experience. You thought that was going to be a detriment, but they said we can train you. So you learned plan giving and how you grew in plan giving to reach different leadership roles to the point where you're saying, let's revision this entire department and make it. Someone said to me, planual giving.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
We keep calling it PAG, even though that doesn't exist anymore. But yeah, I like planual. It's really good. I believe I was just called a plan giving officer. I think that was my actual title. And I was that for 6 years. I was part of a team that there wasn't a whole lot of upward mobility. But I'll be really honest with you. I started that job when I was in my early 30s. And people talk about like quarter-year crisis versus midlife crisis kind of concept. I think I'd been working there for a few years, so my mid to late 30s. I found myself really thinking, why am I doing this? Am I doing this just because this is what I happen to start doing? Do I like it? Do I want to do it? Am I just doing it because I can do it, or am I doing it because I've chosen it? And in that reflection, it was like I did choose this field and it changed everything. So how did I learn? I remember having a lot of firsts at National Geographic. So I remember being the first person to have a gay couple close a charitable gift annuity.
Oh, wow.
And so we didn't know how to do that because they weren't married, but they weren't siblings, but they weren't anything else. And so I remember having to call PG Calc and say, what do I do? And so when you say, how did you learn? A lot of it was by doing. I remember I was the first one to close a charitable gift annuity where we used mutual funds, and we didn't necessarily know how to do that. And so I remember going to my bosses several times saying, what do I do? And they were like, that's a really good question. We've never had one of those before. And so sometimes that's the best way to learn, right? Is that through trial and error or asking a lot of questions. And I was really lucky at National Geographic because we had such wonderful experts attached to the organization. So I would be remiss if I did not give a shout out to John Brown, who is no longer with us. He taught me so much in the field of plan giving. We had direct access to Robert Sharp, who also, no longer with us, but had incredible insight and would teach you all kinds of things. And then we used PG Calc and we used Stelter. So it was like we were using the best of all of the people that you could go to. So it was great to be able to go to those people and ask them questions. Sorry, quick memory as you're asking me these questions. I remember I was on the road and I was on my way to a donor's house someone had asked me about a charitable gift annuity for Canadians. And I'd called Robert Sharp and I'd left a message saying, hey, Robert, I'm traveling. How do I do charitable gift annuities for a Canadian? And he called me back as I was in the car on the way to this donor visit. And I said, Robert, you only have until I get to the donor's house. Because Robert Sharp loved to explain to you like the history of charitable gift annuities, what the tax law is in Canada. And I was like, Robert, we need to go. And it was so funny because I got to the donor's house and he goes, they can do it. They just don't get the tax deduction. I was like, thank you. That was all I needed. And I had all this, he talked the entire drive, right? Yeah. So I learned from really great people. And I also, it sounds cheesy to say I had this group of super friends, but there was a whole group of us who were about the same age and we were all trying to figure this out. And so we felt like it was safe to go to each other and ask questions and say, is this something I should go to my boss with? Or is this something I'm supposed to already know concept? Or what is your org doing versus our org? Simon Williams was at the Nature Conservancy at that time and his wife worked at National Geographic. So I actually knew his wife first. And then she said, you need to meet my husband. I remember he and I would sit through some of these sessions at National Capital Gift Planning Council. And we would say, do you have that? Do you have that? Then did I steal a ton of things from the Nature Conservancy? Yes, I did. But it was so collaborative that way. Like no one felt, I don't want to say no one felt proprietary, but the idea of like a charitable gift annuity is a charitable gift annuity is a charitable gift annuity. How you describe a charitable gift annuity is not proprietary, right? It's what your organization does that is proprietary. So I think this field just feels really generous in helping everybody out. So that was how I did it. Rolled up my sleeves. I dove in. I did a bunch of donor visits, got right out in the field. I knew how to do donor visits because of my previous jobs, but I probably made all the mistakes that every new plan giving officer makes, which you got too technical too quickly. You weren't really listening. You're trying to let me show you what I know. And it's like, they just want to do the quest, knock it
Yeah.
off. So I learned a lot of it through trial and error. And I had really good support around me.
You've said a lot that I want to start to unpack. At National Conference, you
Yeah.
mentioned your super friends,
Yeah.
and it was something that I heard over and over again in different sessions. So first and foremost, how did you make the super friends?
Oh, how did I make the zero friends? This may come as a shock to no one who knows me. I just randomly talk to people. So I think if I can be so bold, when I was starting, this field didn't look like me. And I was even joking with some folks, this conference, the very first conference I went to, and I can't even remember exactly what year it was or where it was, but I remember it looked predominantly male. Like I was the youngest person there. I was in my early 30s, and it was like everybody was 15 to 20 years older than me. It was predominantly males in suits and like older women in like socks and sandals kind of thing. And so it was like, where are the young people? Where are the people who are just starting? Because it felt like everybody at the conference had been doing this for a really long time. So when you say, how do you find your super friends? You literally could just look around the room and be like, you look like me. Like you look like you're approximately my age. And that's what I meant by me. Like I didn't care what color you were, or, anything else, but like you look like you're about my age. And so it would be like, what, hi. And we almost sought each other out, to
Okay.
be honest with you. And I think it comes from, you find super friends from being vulnerable yourself and asking for help, and then also being help to somebody else, like not putting somebody else down when they don't know. So whenever I have someone come up to me and ask me and they say, this might be a stupid question, but how do you do a charitable gift annuity? Yeah, no, let's start there. Let's do this. And if they're asking you, it means that they probably don't have anybody else to go to and they've read about it. But how do you actually bring it up in a conversation or what have you? You know what I mean? That may not be the best example, but you build it by being vulnerable and, putting your trust in others and also being trustworthy yourself. People will ask for your help if you show up, and if you don't make fun of them for asking a question. And I would say early on, this field was so elite that there was a little bit of oh, how could you not know that answer? And it was like, that's not helpful. And so it was like trying to find other people who are like, I don't really know. And so like we would figure out together, or some people were like, ooh, I know that. I just learned that yesterday. And so it was like, I knew this and they knew that. And that other person knew that other thing. It's like between the three of us, we all knew putting puzzle pieces together. And then that just builds over time. And it's been such a joy to continue to have this group of professional family almost.
So the other thing you talked about is like being able to call Robert Sharp and he'll be on the phone.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you had a great group of mentors.
I did.
How did you go about finding mentors and using their time wisely? Because
Mhm.
I know when I was first starting, I had a couple people that I relied on and
Mhm.
considered mentors.
Mhm.
It was always like, I had this question because I didn't have my own group of super friends yet.
Right.
And so it was like, I have this question. So I'm going to ask this mentor this time, and I'm going to ask this mentor that time, and this one, and kind of use them as like in a round. But how did you, I guess, a two-part question. First, how did you find them?
Yep.
And then how is that relationship fostered?
So at that job, they were on retainer. So we had a professional, like the organization had a professional relationship with John Brown. The organization had a professional relationship with Robert Sharp. And so I definitely fostered it probably more than they did. Although John's job was to make sure we were all trained. So he would come into the office, I'm going to say quarterly, and have one-on-one meetings with you and ask you how you were doing. He also had a team that would come in and help as well. And so that was lovely, but it was a little bit on the formal side. And also when you're just starting out, you don't even know what questions to ask,
Right.
right? So you would almost hold on to, this donor asked me a question, I need to hold on to that one and ask John. But they both made themselves readily available. I made some mistakes, not with the two of them, but with even National Geographic is such a huge organization. One time I called the head of the grants department at National Geographic to be like, what kind of scientist was Diane Fossey? And somebody was like, you did not just call him to ask that question. You can Google that, right? But Google was still new at that point, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, don't take advantage of these huge people who are in these fantastic relationships. John would come into the office, and I can't remember how often that was, but you would hold on to questions, but he encouraged you to call him if you got into a sticky situation, but you would also have these one-on-ones. So it was more professional than just mentorship. So it was us having to reach out to them to say, I have a question about X, Y, and Z. Can you help me about this, that, or the other? Now, as part of that relationship, we got training, official training from John Brown, and his was out of Harvard. So you would go up and you would take a John Brown course, and then Robert Sharp had his courses all over the country. And so whenever there was one in DC, we would take one there. And you would just develop these relationships. But I would say it was definitely more, the onus was on us to reach out to them. Now, the informal mentorships were with this group of super friends and what have you. And to be honest with you, I was much more trusting of the people who were my age than I was of the people who were older. And so it didn't feel like a mentorship so much as it felt like classmates, or it felt like colleagues, professional colleagues that we were, as I said, it was like we could ask each other, so we didn't have to ask our bosses. If you were afraid that your question was going to be like too lame to ask a boss, then you could ask your friends and do it that way. So I don't know that I ever had a mentor, not in that sense. I had a huge group of people who've been very influential, but not like a person who took me under their wing. I do feel like in many ways just had to figure it out.
Mm.
And maybe it was because I'm just that much older that wasn't built in. And I feel like it's a little bit different now, to be honest with you. One of the things I try and do is I try and be a safe place for my own team, for them to come to. And you met a couple of my former teammates.
Yeah.
A few of them are working at very prestigious universities now and things along those lines. And so I always wanted them to feel like they had been well trained, that they could go on to that next big step. And I wasn't going to teach them everything, but at least I would give them a solid foundation. And then I'm continued to be a mentor. They can reach out to me at any time. And I think they know that. So I try to be a mentor because I didn't always have a mentor, although I had these titans of this industry. Do you know what I mean? Like in a
Yeah.
different sense of it, but like these really huge names in planned giving who were able to train me from the get-go, which was really spectacular. But in my head, that's formal training. That's not mentorship.
Yeah.
Does that
No,
make sense?
that makes perfect sense,
Yeah.
because it does sometimes feel hard when there are people that are paid to be there.
Yeah.
Like, this is my mentor.
Yeah.
I'm at a big organization,
Yeah.
and there's people that are like, oh yeah, talk to them. They can mentor you. It's like, we're both paid to be here, and we have a formal mentor program. So is that the same type of mentorship that I could need? So hearing that you went through a similar thing is always, it's good to hear that at least a lot of us still struggle with that.
Yeah.
And it is good that there are things like the CGP mentorship program that are built to help people find mentors and pair them up.
Absolutely.
You said you were you started in Plain Giving
Mhm.
in early 30s. Were
Mhm.
there for 6 years with no growth. Maybe there was
Mhm.
growth, but there was same title for 6 years.
That's right.
I think that is something that is not uncommon.
Mhm.
And a lot of times there can be frustration. Can you
Mhm.
talk to,
Yeah.
because you said that you at one point had to sit down and was like, why am I here?
Yeah.
But as you were in a position for that long, can you talk to some of those frustrations and how you said that you came to a conclusion with yourself? But how did you get there, and what were the catalysts? It was like, is this really what's going to be for me? During those 6 years, you had to have wanted to leave. Yes.
Yeah.
What got you to
Yeah.
push through
Mm.
and then finally come to that conclusion that you want
Yeah.
to be here?
Up until that point, I'd been on almost a 3-year cycle. And so my joke for a long time was I was there for 2 cycles.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? So it was about 3 years when I started to get antsy and not very happy and started to look.
Mhm.
So I'd been there for 3 years and I started to look for another job. And it was around 2008, 2009 where the bottom dropped out and there just were no jobs. I was interviewing for a job and I had gotten several interviews in, and the job just went away because they couldn't afford it anymore. They just stopped. And that was incredibly frustrating. And I remember thinking, okay, if the job market is not great right now, and if I have to stay here, I better make some decisions. Do I just want to leave this industry and start a new industry? If I'm going to stay here, what's going to make me happy to stay here? Now, the great thing about where I was working at that time was National Geographic, and it was an incredibly interesting place to work. And so you got to learn about all these different things that were happening all over the world. The grantees at National Geographic are pretty incredible people. So the mission really continued to really resonate. And again, one of my friends, a super friend, she said to me, sorry, I'm laughing because some of these things I've forgotten until you asked me. But one of the things she said to me was, "You are so much happier after you've been out talking to donors." So she said, "When the frustrations of the office get you down, get out on the road," is what she meant. Not get out.
Yeah.
She probably meant that too, but get out on the road, because getting closer to the donors, getting closer to the mission, is always so much more rewarding than staying behind a desk and getting stuck in the hierarchy or the bureaucracy or whatever that's happening. So when I was working there, I think on average I was doing about 40 or 50 visits a year. And because remember, it's a place that's not a university. So your donors are spread out
Mm.
all over. And there was one year, I think I went from 50 to like 100. And it was like I was on the road.
Yeah, you were clearly trying to
I
get
was
out.
clearly trying to get out. That is exactly right. But it was rewarding. I've laughed with people recently. My father and I went on a World War II trip of Europe. And I remembered I'd almost forgotten that when I started in this field, I could start every donor conversation with, where were you during the war? You can't do that anymore.
No.
That doesn't exist. But that was how I started my career, is because there was a story there. And the donors had these remarkable stories. And man, did that make you feel good at the end of the day. I met a donor who never left the state of Ohio. She was like a legit Rosie the Riveter. She worked at like a rubber plant in Ohio. And to the time I met her, she had never left the state of Ohio, but through the pages of National Geographic magazine.
Oh,
Right?
wow.
I met a guy who actually fought for the Luftwaffe. So he was a German soldier and he got shot down over Africa and was sent to a POW camp with Americans, befriended the American soldiers, and they ended up sponsoring him coming to the US. He worked for IBM for his whole life and
Oh, wow.
retired in Sequim, Washington. So like I just kept meeting these extraordinary people who really believed in the mission of where I was working. And so that gets you out of your own head. And that is also interesting. And what I love about gift planning is that it's not the same thing over and over. Often in my job, I did both face-to-face fundraising and marketing. So I got to use both parts of my brain. I got to do an Excel spreadsheet and figure out who we were going to send this to and all those kinds of things, and also have that personal face-to-face. And that makes it stimulating,
Yeah.
right? So that was of interest to me. So the more I got bogged down in bureaucracy, the more I doubled down on the mission of the organization and getting out and meeting with the donors and talking to them about why they loved what we did. And that was the biggest help on those days that were rough. And that was a really tough time. We had a VP. So my VP was right next door to me. And so I guess her equivalent would have been a chief. And so our doors were right next to each other. And I remember the chief of development was basically standing in the VP's door, which means she was standing in my door because our
Okay.
doors were right next to each other. And she was going off on how plan giving doesn't count. She doesn't know why we have it. And it
Oh,
was like,
wow.
hi, I'm sitting right here. Right. And then I can't remember if it was 2008 or 2009, but remember, like the economy just tanked and everything plummeted. And we got some $19 million planned gift or something along those lines. I can't remember the exact amount, but it was like a huge amount, right? And it was somebody that my colleague had cultivated and stewarded, and my colleague had really grown that relationship. So it was like very clear it wasn't manna from heaven. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, these do mean something, these planned gifts. And so it took that huge gift coming in when everybody else tanked. And we got this ginormous planned gift that came in and made all the difference in the world. So that is stimulating. That keeps you interested. That was not boring. And DC has so many nonprofits. And again, since we were all part of the same national capital group, like trying to figure out what everybody's marketing was doing was really stimulating and really interesting and really fun. And so staying with the same job for 6 years, I think people don't understand how could anybody stand that? And it's if you're still growing intellectually, if you're still growing, if you're still being tested isn't the right word, but if you're still stretching your legs, if you're still learning, if you're still doing all, if you're still growing, just
Yeah.
not in title, it's still interesting. And the organization was set up. There was a bunch of us who stayed for quite a long period of time, and almost none of us got new titles. But there was also something I think about. We had a really good groove of all working together. And we felt like we were really making a difference. It was hard too. Yeah.
So then what got you to eventually leave?
Trying to remember if I was recruited or I don't think I was. I think a friend of mine told me that there was a job opportunity at Special Olympics. And what I was intrigued by was it was diving more into marketing. That was definitely going to be a bigger part of my job. And I think they were in a position where they definitely had a person who had been there for a long time and she had really done a good job of building it up. But they were looking to get to that next level. It was the first time that they were hiring another person to really help it. So they were trying to get there. And I think what, if I could be completely honest with you, I think what I liked about it was it was not in the environmental sector. So it was like I
Mm.
was actually leaving my environmental sector. It's almost like when baseball players leave from, when they leave their team, they can't go to their rival. They have to go, if you go from the American League to the National League or something.
Mhm.
That may sound silly, but it was one of those situations of I was looking to get out and stretch my legs in a different way. And when I worked for the Tuberous Sclerosis Alliance, tumors are brain tumors. And so there were a lot of folks with intellectual disabilities. And so
Oh,
I'd
yeah.
had some experience with that already. And Special Olympics was such a great organization and had such a wonderful reputation. I thought it would be really fun. I hadn't, Cystic fibrosis had chapters, but we were all under one 501c3. And so it was interesting to go to, it was so different from where I was basically. So it was going to an organization with chapters, but they each had their own individual 501c3. And how did that work? And they had a plan giving collaborative. So it was like headquarters was the hub for all of their plan giving, and they had to buy in to our services. And it was a really unique model. And it was so different from what I had done. And it was a great way, again, for me to challenge myself and to
Mhm.
keep my
Yeah.
stimulated. And I had a wonderful time there. Really great.
What is the most fun or interesting gift that you've ever worked on?
I love to talk about this one just because it's funny words to say, and that is dolphin human communication. So I was working on estate administration, and we got an estate where half, and it was a sizable six-figure estate, half of it went to the decipherment of ancient languages, and the other half went to dolphin human communication.
Mhm.
And it was like, I'm sorry, what now?
Yeah.
So I had to reach out to people to say, is there a thing such as dolphin human communication? And the decipherment of ancient languages, it's like someone had restricted their gift, but they hadn't really talked to the team. So it's both a life lesson and
Mhm.
of it's just fun to say dolphin human communication, right? And so I've used this as a life lesson. I've even talked to other donors about this. Like what you say, of course, that means X, Y, and Z. It's like when we get it, there's no of course. So it's like, what did you mean by that? And you start to think to yourself, did they even give it to the right person or what
Yeah.
does this mean? And so I literally had to work with the grants team to be like, there we do dolphin meeting communication. You can hear them going, there's a biologist, such and does this, that, or the other. And so what came out of that, which was so fun about it, was I started to develop a really close relationship with the executor of the estate who knew the decedent. They'd been best friends, childhood friends. So he actually knew what the decedent wanted. And so I was able to say, hey, we've got this. Is this kind of what you have in mind or no? And so the decipherment of ancient languages, there was a program that was just getting started on preserving ancient languages and languages that were going extinct. That was perfect for that because I think what people don't realize is like $10,000 or $20,000 can be a huge grant to a scientist. So if you give us $100,000, that's almost 10 years worth of stuff. And I think people don't realize that some of these grants are not very big just to get them started. And so the executor got to meet that team and he got to see what they were doing. And it was so fun. And every year I would come back to him and say, still nothing on dolphin human communication though. Can we move this? Can we use this somewhere else? And he kept saying, I want you to try. And so there was one person who came through and they were a marine biologist and they were studying dolphins. And I said, is this I didn't go to Cypre. I literally just went to the executor and said, is this close enough? And we funded that person. And again, it was like $10,000. Now it's earning interest. So it's actually getting bigger and
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. And you're like, come on, man, help us. And he came to the executor came to the office and got to meet people and do all these things. And it was a fun gift, but it also felt really good because I had developed such a great relationship with the executor. And I remember him saying the decedent would have been so excited to have known that his money went towards this. And that's the closest you can get without knowing the person. So that was really fun.
Yeah. And then you'd say dolphin human communication
Over and over again. And also it's a life lesson. So when you're teaching your young teammates, remember restricted gifts, dolphin human communication, they're like, they never forget it. So that was one of my most fun.
In your career so far, what is the most memorable teaching point, experience, or piece of advice you've received?
I've received. Honestly, it's so simple and it sounds so stupid. But really listen. I think as plan givers, especially as young plan giving officers, we have our vehicles memorized and we're ready to go. And it's maybe they just want to keep it simple and listen. Because the minute you start going to complicated, so many people get overwhelmed so fast. This is talking about your estate plans can be really difficult. And you feel vulnerable, and it can feel so technical and outside of your wheelhouse and everything like that. So like really listen to what the donor is saying and start with the simplest instead of starting with the most complicated. And I think that's a life lesson I have to learn over and over again. I will use the example of I had a major gift officer. Oh, actually, two stories. Sorry. A major gift officer came to me and he said, "Hey, Nicole, I've got this donor who wants to do a charitable lead trust. Can you walk me through it?" And I said, Sure. Charitable lead trust? How did we get there?" And he said, "I got a phone call from a donor and she just inherited $1 million and she wanted to know what she could do. So I told her all about a charitable lead trust." And I was like, "You started with charitable lead trust?" Yeah. And I said, "Dude, start with getting us in the will. Start with an outright gift. Start with, there are all of these simple things." And he was like, "No. Basically, he was trying to do the same thing I was trying to do as a young person. And he was trying to show off and all this kind of stuff." And of course, we never heard from that donor again. They got scared off. And then we just never heard from him again. And I'm not making fun of that person. I think we've all done that, by the way. And it's listen to what they want to accomplish. Listen to what's important to them. And then also keep it simple. So
Real quick before you go on,
go ahead.
that's great advice, but a lot of times I think, especially younger
Yeah.
major gift officers, plain giving officers, they're thinking that they want to listen, but they also know they have metrics.
Yeah.
So that seems like those two things can sometimes be in conflict.
I'm so glad you asked that, Matt. So when I traveled a lot with major gift officers, and I used to be one. So I was trained as a major gift officer, and then I was trained as a plain giving officer. And I prefer the training I got as a plain giving officer, but I drive major gift officers crazy because I go in with almost no outcome. I have no outcome planned because I have to listen and I want to hear where they're going to take me. And they're like, "No, you need to know how much you're going to ask them for and what it's going to be for it." And I'm just like, if you go in with that, then you're not listening. And so it's like this clash. And so I have gone on many, when I first got started, there was a major gift officer. She and I did a lot of travels together and we worked together so well. We were the yin and yang. And when you find that in a major gift officer, hold on to that with all of your being. And I didn't realize how rare that was going to be because it was one of my first experiences. So let's just say my last job where I'm in a leadership position, right? And there was a major gift officer who asked me to go on some donor visits with her. And so we went and I just asked a lot of questions and just listened. And then I just said, "What about that?" And I think the donor felt significantly less pressure and they were more open to it. And at the end, I said, "Okay, let's talk about it. How did that go? What did you think?" And she said, "You're really passive." Sure. Because we don't know what their ending is going to be. So us trying to tell them, it's the exact opposite of what you want. And so she made this comment of like, so it's almost like dating, like you pretend like you don't care. And then you're more inclined to get them to go on a date with you concept. I said, yeah, if the donor even picks up on the slightest whiff of you are trying to talk them into something, they will shut that down immediately. And so that is hard. But I used to argue I was closing more gifts than the major gift officers were. And I was doing it in my passive way, which passive was me listening and making suggestions, but always adding caveat, "Please go talk to your advisors. I can't give you advice," all these kinds of things. And she was like, "That's so passive." And I was like, "We'll see how it goes." And the next day the donor would be like, "I so appreciated that." So I went ahead and reached out to my attorney. So it's hard when you are trying to make those metrics. It really is. But this is why I think it's so important that we use the phrase like, "You have the relationship skills, I'll teach you the rest," kind of concept. It doesn't happen overnight. But the more comfortable you are in your own skin, the more comfortable you are with having these donor conversations, you will actually close more gifts by not trying to ram it down people's throats. I think, again, I said this before, but there's even the slightest whiff of desperation. Or "I just need to meet with you. Please, God, I need 5 visits in Indianapolis." If they think that, then they're like, immediately, no. Like the air of desperation. It is like dating, right? Like, I don't want any part of that kind of concept. When we're talking about life lessons, I had a major gift officer come up to me once and she and I were very good friends. And she said, "All right, I'm just going to tell you." And I said, "Yeah, what's going on?" Like she had a very serious face and she said, "I have successfully avoided the conversation around charitable gift planning for years." And I burst out laughing. I was like, "I knew it. I knew you guys weren't asking." She was like, "No, I did not ask because I was terrified they were going to ask me a follow-up question." And she said, "Now I've got a donor who wants to do a charitable gift annuity, and I know I'm supposed to know how to do this, but I don't, and I'm terrified, and I'm just going to own up to it. And I said, first of all, thank you. I've been suspicious that you guys have been doing this for a long time. So, and I said, how do you want this to go? Do you want me to teach you and you do it? Or do you want me to do it and you can watch me? And she goes, I want you to do it and I want to watch you. And I said, sure. So we went to meet with the donor together. I talked the donor through a charitable gift annuity. The donor closed a 6-figure charitable gift annuity. And she goes, thank you so much. I just needed to hear somebody else do it. Next thing I know, that major gift officer is closing charitable gift annuities like nobody's business. She just needed to get over that hump of the fear of the follow-up question. And I think that's a really good piece of advice for all of us, right? Is that you don't have to have all the answers. You really don't. Yeah.
Right. So another question for you.
Yeah.
Changing gears again.
Love it.
Tell us about a time when you failed or something went sideways, and then how did you course correct?
The first one that came to mind, I mentioned it earlier that I did a charitable gift annuity mutual fund. And because it was my first time doing a charitable gift annuity with mutual funds, and it was our organization's first time doing it with mutual funds, I did not know what was happening until I was knee deep, or probably eye deep in it, which is the broker was dragging their feet with the gift. So the broker was telling the donor, and the donor had known their broker for 30 years. So they had a close relationship. I known the donor for a month. And so the donor comes to me and says, I want to do a charitable gift annuity with mutual funds. I reach out to whoever, and they said, like stocks, but different, but like just have them transfer it. We'll do it. And I was like, great, you just transfer it. And then it was like, you wait a week. And then it was like, okay. So I just wanted to double check, like what's going on here. And it was like, well, the broker says that you guys need to open up an account in order for us to do it. I was like, oh, okay. And so then we do that. And then the broker was like, the donor kept asking me like, what's happening? And the broker was lying to the donor and said, we didn't know what we were doing. Like it was our fault. But what was actually happening was the broker was like, oh, you need a letter. Oh no, it has to be a handwritten letter. Oh, something was off with our computer on Friday. I'm so sorry we weren't able to do it. But it was like excuse after excuse. But every time he would talk to the donor, it was like, we don't know what we're doing. And that's why it's a problem. So at some point, the donor called me and said, what the hell is wrong with you people? I am trying to give you a gift. And I said, sir, why would we be holding that up? We wouldn't. And it was almost like he went, oh. And it was right around Thanksgiving. And I was so frustrated, and I was new. It was my first year on the job. So I was like, I'm screwing this up 6 ways till Sunday. I know I'm not doing this right. There were probably some things that I didn't do correctly along the way, but maybe some of the mistakes were mine, but a lot of them was also this broker was really dragging their feet. So my father happens to be a fundraiser. I was with my dad and stepmom over the Thanksgiving holiday. So I'm telling my dad this story. And my stepmom works for Northern Trust. And she popped her head in and she said, sorry to eavesdrop. Can I ask you what brokerage firm that person was? And I said, sure. And she goes, actually, no. Can I guess?
No.
And I burst out laughing. I'm not going to say who it was. She was 1000% correct. And I said, how did you know that? And she said, they're trained to do that.
Oh.
And that was what I needed. And it was like, what? And then I went back and I changed my whole, because I thought it was me because I was new. And we worked with Mercantile Bank, which is now PNC. And I think I called them and said, so this thing is happening. And I hadn't even gotten them involved. I should have gotten them involved immediately.
Yeah.
Because I thought, oh, it's just me. And I didn't understand, like I wasn't asking for the right thing or whatever. And I reached out to them and they were like, oh, we've seen this before. And so they called the broker and that gift was closed in 24 hours. Because once you talk to bank, they can't get away with that anymore. But when they were talking to us, they could. And so that's one of those ones where it was like, that gift went 6 ways till Sunday. However, we were able to save the gift once we got the bank involved and we were able to close that gift within 24 hours, right? So the donor then, I think, became very aware of the fact that it wasn't us and that it was the broker. We continued to close, I think, either 3 or 4 additional charitable gift annuities with that donor. So that was pretty early on in my career, but it was a great life lesson as well. Sometimes it is us and sometimes it's not always us and sometimes it's partially us, but you can save the gift, I think, if you're being really sincere and honest and an authentic broker with your donors. Like, even if you can say to the donor, look, I'm trying so hard. And sometimes you win some and sometimes you lose some, but there are definitely times where we can save it. And I think it's just by being really authentic and what's going on.
And one last question. This has been great. You've been a pleasure to talk to. You're always amazing. Who in your phone do you want to hear on this podcast? And can you help make that happen?
Who do I want to hear? The first name that came to mind is the one that you and I have been talking about all week, and that is Angie. Angie Sosian. So, I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and the Nature Conservancy has been such a huge, huge plant giving institution. They've been so phenomenal. And I have been in such awe of what Angie has done. But especially as I've become a leader, I see how difficult it is to get people to listen to you, to get people to understand what it is that we do. Even if you have the data to back it up, sometimes people still don't get it. And she has grown such an incredible, huge program. I would love to hear from her. And I've heard her speak many times, but now it's like a slightly different question, which is, my God, how did you get them to listen to you? How did you get them to do that? She's a person I would love to hear from.
Thank you for joining us on Dead Giveaway, where every gift tells a story. A big thank you to Nicole Engdahl for sharing her incredible journey. Join us next month when we sit down with Sherry and Koshi. None of this would be possible without my amazing producer, Jessica Hall, and the support of the entire National Association of Charitable Gift Planners staff. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please share the show and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening to Dead Giveaway, where generosity lives on.